If you've ever wondered how it feels to ask your parents who's the favorite child, have them tell you that we love you both equally, then see them turn to your sibling and quietly say, "It's you by a long shot." Just ask Carlos Sainz how he felt in the last 4 laps of Monza this year. Welcome to Race Weekend Update, where we choose humor as our coping mechanism for the trauma of cheering for Ferrari. Red Bull pulled off a near flawless victory this weekend, with their only loss being that Carlos Sainz took pole for Ferrari. Unfortunately for Carlos, his team also saw this as a loss for Ferrari, which they made abundantly clear when they refused to tell Charles to hold position and bring it home at the end of the race. As the race drew to a close, it was clear that Ferrari was going to take 3rd and 4th, with the only threat to that being if their drivers took each other out. Max was running away with the lead, Checo was a solid number 2, and George Russell was 8 seconds behind, with a 5-second penalty on top of that. Carlos pleaded with Ferrari to be reasonable, knowing how much there was on the line, but Ferrari told him that they were going to race to the end.
No risk, race until the end, no risk.
If Carlos Sainz Jr. was Jos Verstappen's son, there would be a fork in the hand of that race engineer right now. If Carlos Sainz Jr. was Michael Schumacher's brother, the Michael would have marched right over to Fred Vasseur at the end of that race and told him, "Give me my brother back." But unfortunately for Carlos, he's not the son or brother of an insane Formula 1 driver. He's the son of a world champion rally driver. And I'm not that familiar with the world of rally racing, but I'm guessing that you don't have to physically threaten people to get your team to support you in that series. Luckily, Carlos Sainz Jr. has learned how the game is played and duked it out with Charles Leclerc and took home the best of the rest position with no help whatsoever from his team or teammate. Kinda like how he got his first race win last year. He learned he has to assert himself over the entire nation of Italy, tell Ferrari they're wrong, and take matters into his own hands if he wants to have a good result. Imagine working in a hostile environment like this, with all the stress that comes from it. Then looking across the paddock and seeing Max Verstappen taking his 10th victory in a row in an equally toxic work environment. But instead of the organization actively working against him, the toxicity is actually working for them. Red Bull is the Black Mirror version of a meritocracy where all that matters is your performance and nothing else. Ferrari, on the other hand, is a Saiyan-style aristocracy where you will get sent to a desolate planet if you show more fighting ability than the crown prince. The funniest part of all this is you'd think Aston Martin would be like that, but Lance Stroll has never really shown enough ability to get any favoritism beyond the fact that he can't lose his seat. And they've also been pretty good to whichever world champion they have on payroll. Alonso may have barely finished in the points today, but you know that they're never going to ask him to compromise his race to give Lance a leg up. Mercedes likes to think they're a meritocracy, but when the chips are down, Lewis never gets the team orders, even when Georgie Boy is pimp slapping him like it's the 90s and it's still cool to say pimp slapping. Then at the back of the grid, we had the two idiocracies, Alpine and Haas, bringing up the rear. Alpine must have felt that Pierre's podium in the last race was too much success, and they needed to remind the French drivers where Renault belongs in the world of motorsport. And then Haas, for whatever reason, decided to bust out their 2021 spec cars. AlphaTauri, on the other hand, did the honorable thing and offed Yuki's car during the formation lap to save him the shame of being outperformed yet again by literal fetus Liam Lawson. And of course, Max Verstappen won a record 10 races in a row today, surpassing Sebastian Vettel's record of 9. After the race, Max was asked if he had received any messages from Vettel, but Max replied that he hadn't seen his phone yet, so we'll see. Lucky for you, I managed to get my hands on this never-before-seen screenshot of Seb's messages to Max. And now over to the Canadian Computer Collector for the Canadian summary of the Grand Prix.
Anyone who's owned a high-performance PC can tell you they're a lot like race cars. They're fast as hell, but they're always breaking down. Yuki's car breaking down on the formation lap was unfortunate, but it happened. The crazy part this season, though, is that it doesn't seem to be happening for Max. Clearly they're tuning the car down or something, but his reliability has been unbelievable. And I do mean unbelievable, as in, I don't believe it. You think other teams are catching up to Red Bull because Red Bull stopped developing their car? Just think back to when you used to play video games with your older brother and you were almost beating him. Then think about how fond you are of those memories, until years later when you see him playing video games with your youngest cousin and he's clearly sandbagging it to make it fun for him. But given that my brother wrote this script, I'm now just finding out that he's onto me and knows that I was never actually going to let him win at Simpsons Hit and Run. I was just trying to make it close enough that he wouldn't quit playing. And that's exactly what Red Bull's doing. Don't think for a second they won't turn that engine up when other teams start to threaten their perfect victory record this season. They're just tuning it down to avoid a DNF. They're managing the gap so that when people start crying for regulation changes, they can look at every race and say, "Oh, look how close they were. We weren't winning by that much." Despite the fact that at any point they could have pulled another 30 seconds if they wanted to. So just remember, as an older brother who is further along in development than you never had a chance, and you never will, unless you advocate for rules changes to level out the playing field.
And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. And now for the poll of the week. This one's a fun one. I asked, If an F1 driver or team got caught paying a cloud seeding company to try to make it rain during a race, should that be allowed? And 67% of respondents said that should not be allowed, while 33% think it should. This is a really interesting one because, as some brilliant armchair analyst pointed out, there's no rule saying that you can't do that. But I would posit that, despite the fact there's no rule that says dogs can't drive an F1 car, there's likely some more general rule somewhere that exists that covers the situation. If you're a person who enjoys rules lawyering, let me know in the comments which rule you think would address cloud seeding and whether or not you think current regulations would allow for an enterprising team to pull something like this to get a wet race that would have otherwise been dry. And this one goes out to the OG fiends, the real ones. The ones that have been around since I was saying, let's be fiends together at the end of every video. A joke with just enough spice to give you the ring of fire after your next dump. Alex Albon managed to keep both McLarens behind him for the entire race, admitting to Lando during the post-race show that their actual race strategy was to keep both McLarens specifically behind them for the entire race. In other words, Alex Albon has the balls to say to Lando's face on live TV that his actual race strategy was to shit down his throat, specifically.
Caught you a lot there. You win in a Ascari. Yeah, that's where you need balls, so.
Support the channel by joining my Patreon.